This program was funded in part by a grant from the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky.
The ICU doctor looked at Jeff and I and said, "Who hurt your child?"
That wasn't a dad loving his kid, that was a perpetrator grooming a victim.
CPS workers every single day are saving lives.
Welcome to Child Abuse and Neglect, a KET special report. I'm Renee Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us. This program will discuss physical and sexual abuse and may be disturbing for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. The child abuse and neglect rates for Kentucky are astounding. For several years, our state was ranked #1 for child maltreatment by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Over the last couple of years, though, we've seen some progress, most recently ranked at #6, but we still have a long way to go. We can all help to continue this progress. Kentucky is a mandatory reporting state. That means if you suspect abuse or neglect of a child, you are required by law to make a report. You can make a report by calling the toll-free child abuse hotline at 1-877-KY-SAFE-1. We have an unprecedented opportunity to prevent child abuse and neglect in our state, but first we must recognize the problem. Many are surprised to learn that neglect is the most common form of child maltreatment. Neglect is the failure to meet a child's basic needs like shelter, food, medical care, and proper supervision. Many of us grew up learning about stranger danger. But statistics show that parents are the most common perpetrators of child abuse and neglect, followed by step-parents and parents' romantic partners. Substance abuse and domestic violence are the top caregiver risk factors found to increase the risk of child abuse and neglect for Kentucky's children, according to the latest child maltreatment report. While parents are the most common perpetrators of child abuse and neglect, they can also end up a hero in their own story. Christy Dutton sat down with Mandy Colwell, a mother of 3 boys who were removed by Child Protective Services. She talks about the determination and support it took to put her life and family back together.
What did life look like at that time? Where were you staying?
We were staying in a house that we were renting, but we ended up losing that. So we were bouncing back and forth from couch to couch. And then we also lived in our van for a while. And so we ended up using hard drugs. And, we ended up going down a road that we shouldn't have went down. And that led to them being taken.
And how old were your sons when that was going on?
Riley was 3 years old and Chase was a year and a half, and Jaden would have been 6 years old.
What did that feel like for you at the time?
Oh, it was heartbreaking, and I was very angry. I was very, very angry. I didn't think that anything like that would ever happen because I tried to promise myself that nothing like that would happen. They wouldn't go through what I went through as a child. So, I just didn't know what to do.
One of the common ways children die or almost die during child neglect cases is from exposure to drugs or substance abuse. Do you think there was a danger that maybe you didn't perceive at the time?
Yes, I do. I believe them being around us, we weren't ourselves, so we did do things that we shouldn't have done in front of them. We would fight, and they were exposed to a lot of unsavory people. So yes, there were dangers.
And for the people who made the decision to remove your children, what would you say to them now?
I would say I completely understand why. I understand that it was in the best interest of the boys to be taken, and that was the most important thing in the situation. They were the most important thing in the situation.
And how long were you separated from them, and what was that time like?
We were separated for 2 years, and It was to the point to where I could see a Pampers commercial on the TV and I would start crying. I wanted desperately to be there for them, but it was just very, very difficult to get away from the situation that we were in.
So you'd been separated from your boys for 2 years, and during those 2 years, you had to do a lot of work to get them back. And I want to give credit where credit's due, because it took hard work and discipline and determination on your part. Not everybody has that kind of success story. But you also had support from the outside. That must have made a huge difference. Tell us about that.
Yes, it really did. Like, you know, if we just have somebody there for us to back us up and know that we're worth it and believe in us, it makes a world of the difference. I mean, for me, it was church and the community that came with church. They, you know, got behind us and realized that we were worth investing in. And that's when they stepped up and they helped us come up to where we are now.
So if somebody's listening to your story now and it's sounding too familiar to them, and they have not been able to turn that corner, what would you say to them?
I'd say do it. Do it for yourself. Don't do it for anybody else. Do it for yourself, because you deserve a better life. You know, you deserve to have good things in life, and you can do it. It's just a matter of that one decision, because we're all away from one decision of a totally different life.
Colwell also credits the support of her family for providing stable housing to begin a new life. She is a member of KY Seat, a birth parent advisory council launched from a partnership between the Department for Community-Based Services and Kentucky Youth Advocates. These parents have personal experience with Kentucky's Child Protective Services and advocate for priorities that support birth parents and their families. I spoke with Secretary Eric Friedlander from the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services about the state's role in protecting kids and the deadliest form of neglect. Secretary Friedlander, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
So Kentucky has been experiencing some ups and downs when it comes to child maltreatment. There were several years where we were highly ranked in the nation for child abuse and neglect. It seems in these past couple of years, we have edged down from being in the top 5. Now we're at 6. Is that something to brag about? And what do you attribute maybe some positive movement? Is it really progress?
So I tend to look at things as right direction and wrong direction. Obviously, we move from number 5 to number 6. It is not necessarily something to celebrate other than direction. Still way too much abuse, neglect, and what we're seeing, even though we've moved from 5 to 6, what we're seeing is actually more severe with our children. We're through COVID, through not having eyes on folks, we're just seeing children who come into our systems, and if you talk to school personnel, children who are going into classrooms with bigger issues.
What's the connection between poverty and neglect?
Absolutely, and it's an excellent question. So let's say a social worker goes into somebody's home and they open up a refrigerator and there's no food, right? Well, that's neglect. There's no food here. Well, it may be that it's poverty.
Right.
So not getting those two things confused, that's an example I like to give, or the house may not be as like clean and tidy as we might want to see, but it's because somebody's working all the time and doesn't have the opportunity to do that, or children are left on their own just a little where we're not comfortable. But it's not that the parent doesn't love them, it's that the parent's trying to provide for them in a low-wage job, in a true minimum wage job. And so that's not neglect. That's poverty.
So can you define for us what neglect is?
So there's easy medical neglect, where a child has some sort of medical issue that's not getting attention and should, and the parent is not following up on that or doing transportation pieces of it. That's neglect. That's pretty straight up. The parent really isn't there, right? Or leaving the child with a paramour, something like that, and that's when a lot of physical abuse happens. That they're not actually paying attention to their child in a way that they should.
Yeah. And other types of neglect other than medical are?
Well, if there's no food in the refrigerator,
Right,
but there,
yeah.
but it's because the parents are abusing substances, right? And so there's money somewhere there, but that's not happening, or there's substances sitting about, right, where the child can get at them, and there's no attempt to work on that.
Yeah.
We often work for family reunification, but if the child is in danger, then without the proper parental attention, then that's what we would call neglect.
So when we look at the child fatality, near fatality report that was released in the last couple of months, one of the things that was noticed is that children are getting access to illicit, dangerous, deadly, illegal substances, fentanyl, other drugs that causing their death. Can you talk about that being a part of neglect and what can be done about it?
Absolutely. What we see, illicit or just regular prescription drugs, right? What happens is they get left out, and a child may reach for them, particularly toddlers who are, those of you who have toddlers know everything goes in the mouth. And so if you're not careful with that terrible outcome can happen.
I do want to ask you about reunification and the priority that is for the cabinet. How high of a priority, and is that at any means, by any means necessary, do you strive for reunification? And when do you make the determination that is not in the best interest of the health and safety of a child?
That is probably one of the most difficult questions that we have. I think from a federal perspective, that's where the funding comes from, they do put an emphasis on reunification. And when you think about it, if you can get someone's biological parents, those folks who should have the most love for their children, to reunify and support them to do that, that is really a good outcome.
Well, thank you, Secretary Friedlander, for providing the answers that I think will help a lot of people.
Thank you.
Since most child neglect fatalities in Kentucky occur when children get a hold of prescribed or illegal drugs, Secretary Friedlander says medicine lockboxes could have a significant impact in saving the lives of children. There are no simple answers to explain why someone would hurt a child. The factors that lead to abuse are not always easy to detect, like financial stress or mental health issues. A common thread often found in abuse cases is an unrealistic expectation for a child's development. Expecting a child to be capable of reasoning, controlling emotions, and completing tasks before the child is developmentally able to do so. This puts the most vulnerable children in danger. Infants under the age of 1 are victims of abuse and neglect at a significantly higher rate than any other age. They also represent the highest rate of child maltreatment deaths in Kentucky. The deadliest act of physical abuse is from abusive head trauma, also known as shaken baby syndrome. This often happens when a parent or caregiver forcefully shakes a crying baby due to frustration. It's the most common way that a young child becomes seriously brain injured or even dies as a result of abuse. Christy Dutton sat down with a Richmond mother who shared the story of her son, Colton. He endured this life-altering abuse, being violently shaken when he was just a few months old.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. You've been raising awareness about this for years, so thank you. I want to start with Colton when he was born. What was he like as a baby those first few months, and what was it like for you as a new mom?
He was such a ball of joy. He was a really good baby. He was fun. You could tell he had a really good personality. And then for me, it was a big adjustment just learning momhood. What is it like to be a mom?
But then came to a point where you knew something was wrong. Walk us through what happened.
Colton seemed very uncomfortable. I thought it was sickness because he was warm to touch, he was sleepy, he was fussy when you did try to wake him up. He wasn't out of it, but he just wanted to sleep. So I made a doctor's appointment with his pediatrician, and that morning we went to see her. I pulled back the car seat cover and he was doing this twitching motion with his arm. We went back up to the pediatrician, and when we got back in, she said, well, because of this episode. And she said, I now see that his soft spot is bulging. I'm just going to be conservative. Let's send you to the Children's Hospital. And that's kind of where the downward slide starts. We got back rather quickly. They started the whole battery of medical assessments, blood work, urinalysis, just all your standard protocol. All of that's coming back normal. But he's actively still having these episodes, which it's been pretty determined at this point. These are seizures. They sent us for a CT scan, and the CT scan revealed a lot of hemorrhaging on his brain. And at that point, the ICU doctor looked at Jeff and I and said, "Who hurt your child?" And at the end of that day, the social worker made the call just out of precaution that we were no longer allowed to be alone with Colton. When the MRI results came in, they sat us down for a meeting. They said, "This isn't the first time your child had been abused." And we just, where did we fail? You know, like, where did we go wrong? How did we miss this mark so badly? They just said it was old blood, new blood on top of old blood. He also had retinal hemorrhaging in his eyes. None of his injuries were physical injuries. Like, they were not present to the naked eye. Because our child was also part of with a child care provider. They interviewed the child care provider and any family that had used that child care provider. And that sort of gave the picture of this injury didn't happen by these people. It happened in the child care provider's care. We were told Colton would be mechanically dependent, that he would be on a trach, a feeding tube, and that's if he even made it. After about a week and a half, 2 weeks, they were able to remove his breathing tube. And the ICU doctor said, "If you told me 3 days ago we would be able to remove this tube, I would have told you were crazy."
At what point did you realize that the baby you took into the hospital was not going to be the same baby you'd take home?
That final day when I realized I am now taking home a child who is medically complex. In my head, we had painted this picture of this easy parenthood, and it's not going to be so easy anymore.
How is Colton now, 7 years later? What's he like now?
Colton is not the child they predicted he would be. He is a super vivacious 7-year-old. I like to say he's a force to be reckoned with. He's a wild man. He gets to live a pretty fulfilling life. He gets to have his buddies, and he gets to have his grandparents and all those things. The biggest thing I would want families to take away is advocate for your child. If you feel in your gut that something isn't right, it's okay to have open, honest conversations. Hey, this is a thing. If you're feeling upset, if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to set my child down in a safe space and go get a drink of water. As long as my child's safe, it is okay that you have to take care of yourself, because if we're not caring for ourselves, our kids aren't going to be cared for.
Through her personal experience, Renner has worked to raise awareness about abusive head trauma and believes that education about the dangers of shaking an infant or toddler could save the lives of children. Kelsey Starks talked to Dr. Melissa Curry, who specializes in child abuse pediatrics at Norton's Children's Hospital in Louisville. She explains how to identify child abuse in young children.
Dr. Curry, thank you so much for being here with us. Pediatric abusive head trauma is something more babies die of than any other type of physical child abuse. Can you explain, this is something we know as shaken baby syndrome. Most people have heard of it as. What is your medical explanation for what that is?
Sure. So pediatric abusive head trauma is the most dangerous and deadly form of child physical abuse. And it basically involves any type of trauma to the head that's from other than accidental means. The classic shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma involves brain injury. So we can see bleeding on the outside of the brain, which we can detect with a head CT scan, which is why we do CT scans in the emergency department when these children come in. Sometimes the children have bruises and other injuries, sometimes they don't, and they look just perfect. So we teach doctors to have a low threshold to consider child abuse in general for those reasons, but in particular we're looking for altered mental status, so a child that's spaced out or not really focusing on faces, a child that's having seizures or breathing problems. All of those can be early warning signs. Vomiting in the absence of diarrhea can be a sign of increased pressure in the head.
So doctors, of course, are trained to look for things like this. What can be done to help prevent injuries like this?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that we can do. I think that all of us can offer to be of assistance to families with young children so that if they become overwhelmed, they have someone that they can call. Another really key piece of prevention is recognizing bruising. Bruising in babies is never normal until babies are pulling up and taking steps while holding onto furniture. They really don't earn their bruises. So we use the 10-4 bruising rule to help us detect bruises that are concerning for physical abuse.
So explain, this is the physical abuse that can be detected by those outward bruises. What is the 10-4 rule?
So the 10-4 bruising rule stands for torso, ears, and neck. So that's the TEN. So any bruising to the torso, ears, or neck in a child under 4 years of age, or any bruising anywhere in a child 4 months of age or younger, is high risk and needs to be further evaluated. Doesn't necessarily mean it's definitely abuse. It's not a diagnostic tool. It's a screening tool to let us know when we need to look deeper as physicians.
So those types of bruising in children that young are not common. Like kids that age don't easily bruise.
That's right. So babies, until they're pulling up and taking steps, generally don't earn bruises anywhere in any location. And then once they are mobile, it's the torso, ears, and neck. And those are really rare areas to see bruising from accidental means, just regular childhood wear and tear.
And so outside of that, are there any other signs and symptoms, slap marks or things like that, that you can watch out for?
Sure, absolutely. We can see patterned injuries. So patterned injuries, the most common one is the slap mark. Slap marks are usually on the left side of a child's face. They can be on either side, but they're usually on the left because most people are right-handed. They tend to look linear, so they look like stripes. So if you see bruising that looks stripe-like, that's a big red flag.
Well, let's talk a little bit about neglect, which is the most common type of child abuse. What are some of the signs and symptoms of something like that?
You know, neglect can take many forms. We see medical neglect in children who are either not taken for medical care when they should be, or they're taken for medical care, but the advice isn't followed. We can see neglect due to unsafe access to deadly means. So that's when children get a hold of guns that aren't secured or get a hold of medications that aren't secured. And that leads me to one type of neglect that we're seeing much more commonly these days, which is environmental neglect. And that is happening when individuals leave illicit drugs out where young children can get a hold of them, and the children are ingesting it and coming into the emergency department very sick.
What is something that could prevent things like this, neglect? What is something that could really make a significant impact?
Well, you know, when it comes to prevention of neglect, we think about more systemic issues like making sure families have the resources that they need, that they have access to food and shelter and clothing. So public assistance programs are really helpful when it comes to preventing neglect. Treatment of substance abuse and mental illness is another big one. substance abuse and mental illness are commonly seen in cases of neglect, and if we can get the parents the help that they need, the children do a lot better.
We thank Dr. Curry for her time, expertise, and dedication to protecting children. Child sexual abuse is never an easy topic, but one that is essential for adults to understand. Unfortunately, it's more prevalent than most people realize. About 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys in the U.S. will be sexually abused before they turn 18, according to the Centers for Disease Control. To prevent this abuse, we need to be aware of how it happens, who is at risk, and the warning signs. About 90% of children who are victims of sexual abuse know their abuser, according to Crimes Against Children Research Center. This is often a family member or someone the family trusts. Christy Dutton spoke to Laken Albrink, an attorney and assistant professor of legal studies at Morehead State University. She is also a sexual abuse survivor. Here's her story.
First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to share your story with us. It can be difficult to hear, but it's important. Let's start with your stepfather. When did he come into your life, and what was your all's relationship like leading up to the abuse?
So we really relied on my stepdad for all of our income and for things like, I remember he would be the one who would get us up and get us ready for school and have our cereal made and things like that. When I got a little older, so preteen age, he started taking more of an interest in me, and I think that was exciting for me because I was getting a father figure and someone who was really into being a dad to me, and I think that's something I had been wanting my whole life.
So how did the abuse begin, and how old were you?
When I was around 12 years old, I know my stepdad took a lot more interest in me. He had me doing a lot of work in the garage, and I started missing a lot of school, and he would take me down gravel roads and let me practice driving. Sometimes it would be sitting on his lap and steering, and then other times he would let me drive on gravel roads at night, and that's where a lot of the grooming and the abuse first started happening.
So how did he normalize that inappropriate contact with you?
I remember him saying, you know, you're my stepdaughter, it's not like you're my biological daughter, so it's different. And one thing that he was really good at was making me feel like, even though I was 12 or 13, that I was much more mature for my age. He would say that I was a leader and I was really smart and I could make decisions that other kids my age couldn't because, you know, I had this gift of being intellectual and being mature. What I know now, though, is that was a tactic to not only start the abuse, but to also make it feel like I had choice in the situation, which ultimately then later on made me feel like it was my fault that it happened.
Even though you didn't really recognize this as sexual abuse, did you try to reach out to anyone during the time it was occurring because you knew something just wasn't right about it?
Well, first of all, my stepfather was really reinforced how important it was not to talk about it and not to say anything because people just wouldn't understand. He had told me that this happens in lots of families. It's just sort of taboo to talk about it. And so, you know, I didn't recognize it as abuse. I recognized it, and he portrayed it as, let me teach you about sex. And I sort of internalized that maybe it was my fault because I'd asked some questions.
Somebody did report it, and Child Protective Services came to your house at some point. Tell us what happened then.
At some point, someone had reported abuse, suspected abuse, and a social worker and a police officer came out to the house and interviewed me. And I denied that anything was happening. And I knew that if he were to be removed from the home, that our lives would fall into shambles. And that's exactly what happened when I did come forward. He made all the money for the family. We lived in poverty, and his absence from the home would mean a lot to the rest of us financially and in other ways. Our mom was not in the capacity to raise, there were 5 of us kids, and so she was just not in the capacity to do that emotionally, financially, or any other way.
When you did report your stepdad to the police, what went into that decision and what happened after that?
So I reported my stepdad to the police when my middle sister was around the age that I was when the abuse started happening to me. And I had gotten concerned and worried that something similar might happen to her. I was also in college at the time that I came forward, and I think a lot of my experiences in college really gave me the confidence and the independence to feel like I could do something. And that's where I first encountered the definition of grooming. And I just remember the moment of that, putting a word to what happened to me, feeling so powerful, and that it started to make sense. That wasn't a dad loving his kid, that was a perpetrator grooming a victim.
And you reported him to the police. That meant he'd be taken out of the home, and that's going to disrupt the home, but then that also means there's going to be legal proceedings. How did that go?
When I was talking to the police, I ended up testifying. There was a trial, and the jury ended up convicting him of all of the charges and sentencing him to the maximum that they could. I think it's important to educate kids on child abuse and grooming, but it's never a child's responsibility to prevent or to stop child abuse. And that's all of our responsibilities as adults. It's our responsibility to give children safe and healthy childhoods.
We want to thank Laken Albrink for bravely sharing her story with us. Much of Albrink's work as an attorney and professor focuses on training prosecutors and attorneys to be trauma-informed and how to empower victims through the process of prosecution and representation. Albrink also worked with State Senator Julie Rocky Adams to pass legislation that increases the amount of time a person convicted of incest must serve before becoming parole eligible. If you are a victim of sexual abuse, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline for support. It's free, it's confidential, and available 24/7. Call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673. As you heard from Albrink's story, an offender will often use grooming techniques to draw a victim into a sexual relationship and maintain it through secrecy. Grooming behaviors can include special attention, outings, and gifts, isolating the child from others, filling needs and roles within the family, treating the child as if he or she is older, and the use of secrecy, blame, and threats to maintain control. Kelsey Stark spoke to Sonia Gray, the Executive Director of Exploited Children's Help Organization, or ECHO. She explains the warning signs of sexual abuse and sheds light on a growing trend that allows child predators to have access to children like never before.
Thank you so much for being here. We are talking about sexual abuse, and that's a term I feel like everybody has heard. Few people know the real definition. How would you define that?
Yeah, it's really any sexual act between an adult and a minor, and when one exerts power over the other.
So that could be in a multitude of situations, and we're particularly talking about online as one place that is worrisome. When it comes to sexual abuse, another term we hear is grooming.
Yes.
And this is another one that has a lot of misinformation out there. What is that exactly?
If you think about grooming, it's really a technique that perpetrators or predators use to be able to gain the trust of a child. So there are several steps that a perpetrator may go through before they even actually have that first conversation or that first initial approach to a child. And some of it is what I really talk to parents about, is that perpetrators try to build a profile of that child. So they look for children that may be in vulnerable situations, that may be in isolated situations, low self-esteem. They're really looking for those kids to be able to really gain that trust from that child, and then they will start those other actions thereafter.
So they really try to get that trust from the child first, and that way they're not a stranger anymore when this happens, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the biggest thing for a perpetrator is to gain the trust of that child. And then from that, then they will ask favors or ask, or things to do, or, come and meet me or meet me here.
When it comes to internet safety, a disturbing trend here shows sexual predators have more access than ever to children on the internet. Kids spend so much time online. How do we as parents and adults protect them online?
So one statistic that I do want to share is that about 43% of children have been approached by a stranger online.
Wow.
And so this is, we live in a digital space. This is not going to go away. So one of the things that we really encourage parents to do is, first off, is to have open conversation about digital safety. What does that look like in the home, in the environment? What does it look like for their child if they're approached by a stranger online? And secondly, what to do if they are approached, and making sure that their children know that they are safe adults and that they can share anything with them. And once again, for parents not to overreact, but just to sit back and listen, and then ensure the child that you're going to take, the handle from there and make sure to provide the safety precautionary methods.
And as parents, it's so difficult because, like we said, there's really no precedent. A lot of us didn't grow up with social media, so it's hard to know what to look for. What are some of the red flags parents should be watching for on social media?
So some of the warning signs for parents, and specifically if a child has been exposed to inappropriate content, or if they have been contacted by a digital stranger as well, is that you'll see isolation, mood changes or mood swings. You may see self-harm where it's I would say biting, cutting. One sign that goes unrecognized sometimes are stomach aches and headaches. If a child immediately does not want to be on social media anymore, if they're turning their devices over for something that they don't want you to see, those are all warning signs. And once again, it's not the factor that something has happened, but this is the opportunity for parents to really start that conversation and start that dialogue about a safety plan.
Yeah, the open lines of communication there are key. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Every one of us can help prevent child sexual abuse. Being aware of the problem and the warning signs is an important step. Here are some other ways to protect children from sexual abuse. Minimize the opportunity for abuse to occur by reducing isolated one-on-one situations between children and adults. Monitor your child's internet usage. Have age-appropriate conversations about bodies, sex, and boundaries. If a child tells you or hints that sexual abuse is occurring, encourage that child to speak freely and don't make judgmental comments. Then report it to Kentucky's Child Abuse Hotline at 1-877-597-2331. Preventing child abuse and neglect is the responsibility of every one of us. You might be the key to protecting a child from the most damaging experience of his or her lifetime. I spoke to a panel of experts dedicated to protecting Kentucky's children, and as you'll see in our discussion, ending child maltreatment will take a multi-layered approach. As we talk about solutions and prevention, we're joined by the following panelists who are with us today. Jana Estep Jordan, who is Director of Operations and Prevention Education for Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. Jay Miller, Dean of the University of Kentucky College of Social Work. And Pam Darnell, CEO of Families and Children's Place based in Louisville. It's great to have you all here. Thank you for all the work that you do all year round on this issue. Ms. Estep Jordan, I want to begin with you. Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky, that's the word and the mission is in the name, right? And you carry the responsibility of trying to prevent child abuse and neglect in Kentucky. We know that Kentucky is a mandatory reporting state. First question, do you think Kentuckians know that, first of all? And what is it going to take other than just reporting to help reverse some of these trends we're seeing when it comes to child abuse and neglect in Kentucky?
Well, that's a great question. Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky conducted a study several years ago, and we found that of those that we surveyed, roughly 80% understood that it was a mandated reporting state. However, there was still some gray area in their understanding of mandated, meaning all Kentuckians were mandated reporters. So we do know that the information is out there, but we want 100% of the state to understand that. And so the other part of your question is that we're moving to create a movement where everybody in the state, so from our neighbors, our places of worship, organizations, businesses, move to this lens of being a community supporter, where we all understand our role to prevent maltreatment before it ever begins, because true primary prevention of child abuse happens when every one of us understands that role. So we're thrilled to launch the end of March, beginning of April, right during Child Abuse Prevention Month, a campaign that's called Lean on Me Kentucky. And this movement, this campaign, will encourage everyone at every level, that individual one-on-one level, whether you have access to impact change in communities or the whole state. It will encourage you to take a step back and look at the individuals and groups you have access to and how you can reach out and make sure they have somebody to lean on. So the idea behind it is that lean on your neighbor, lean on your friend, whether you're a listening ear, whether you have learned of a resource that you might want to share with your social media networks or a neighbor that you see might be in need of that service. As well as, in order for us to be helpers ourselves, we have to take care of ourselves. So learning when we ourselves need to step up and ask for help.
Sometimes it can seem like a really daunting task when you think, well, there's a child I know that's in need. I don't know whether I should get involved. I'm afraid to get involved. What if I'm wrong? All of the questions people ask themselves when you're doubtful of a situation or fearful to get involved. What would you say when you have those concerns?
I think it's hard for us to figure out what that fine line is. So I like to use the story of Sam. So a young boy, about 8 years old, sitting on his front steps. And he might look a little scruffy, just sitting there alone. And the neighbor looks out and she sees him and she thinks, well, he's alone. I don't see the parent's car, getting a little concerned. So 10 minutes passes and he's still there. 20 minutes, an hour passes, and she calls the authorities to check on him. Well, mom was at work, couldn't get off, and the babysitter was sick. So now we have launched an investigation into this child's life, when ideally what we want to have happen is we want that neighbor looking out the window to step outside and say, hey, Sam, what's going on? Right. How can I support you in whatever's going on in your life right now? Mm-hmm. And we can see if we take that step to ask questions and see how we can support others, even if it is just a listening ear. We don't have to have those answers, that we can see that change.
Pam, it's good to have you here. Ms. Darnell, CEO of Families and Children's Place, but you started off as a social worker, so you've been in lots of the situations that we have discussed tonight that so many of Kentucky kids unfortunately find themselves in.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about reporting abuse and volunteering and how advocacy centers like yours really helps make a difference, and what other supports do you need?
Right. So thank you, Renee. Our child advocacy centers here in Kentucky are amazing services. There are 15 of those wonderful centers. They are mandated in state law to provide very special services to kids who've been hurt by sexual abuse or human trafficking. And those are services that, unfortunately, when kids are hurt that way, they are critical services to make sure that child and family has the very special services they need so they can be happy and healthy and just be a normal kid again. Mm-hmm. And we have a wonderful association of all 15 of those centers. Another one of the things that it's really important to know, though, is Kentucky has one of the best prevention services, and it's called Hands Like Your Hand, because every parent can use a helping hand. And that is voluntary home visiting that really helps new parents, and even parents now, there's some support for parents who have multiple children, to really use their own strengths and their own understanding of their child to build safe, happy, loving, and nurturing homes. The reason that's important is because that's what prevents child abuse, is when those parents and families have the resources they need to make sure that they're building the homes that are safe for their children.
So what are the missing pieces of the prevention puzzle?
So one of the big pieces that is really important for folks to understand is that there is a significant funding crisis for organizations that provide prevention services and organizations that provide that critical intervention. And so unfortunately, in our sector, in the nonprofit sector, funding is often very restricted, and often the reimbursements, say from Medicaid for Hands or from other supports for the child advocacy centers and many other support for organizations that provide crucial residential care for children and youth who cannot live at home because of abuse and neglect, some of those reimbursements rates haven't changed in 20 to 30 years. So COVID really exacerbated that crisis. And what we're seeing now is that, like all for-profit businesses, many nonprofit businesses are having these workforce capacity challenges because we haven't had reimbursements increasing in decades. And so I do want to say, however, that our governor and our state legislature, including our Senate leadership and Senator Julie Rocky Adams, in the last legislative session did some amazing work. And so there has been new money added to certain services. The Child Advocacy Centers of Kentucky now have additional money to share across all 15 centers. There was some additional money made across the state for Hands, and that is wonderful, and we are so grateful. Now the challenge will be, though, that those kinds of increases, we need to be strategically thinking about investing in prevention into the future so that we're creating that opportunity for those reimbursements to have built-in increases so we don't have to go another 20 or 30 years before we really provide the support that our kids and our communities need. But part of that also, Renee, is so many nonprofit organizations right now, because of the workforce capacity challenges, are turning away families. And so I was just speaking with someone last night. They had a waiting list of 6 months for residential care, and they just stopped the list and just had to say, we can't take any more kids because we don't have enough money to retain the staff. Our own agency has felt that, especially in our mental health services, with reductions in Victim of Crime Act funding that really help support those services. So, for example, our counseling team has been decreased by 50%. Because our funding has been so significantly reduced.
Well, Dr. Miller, thank you for being here with us. This is a system that you've been within and work now on the other side to help kids who were once like you. So I'll give you a moment to share with our audience how you've done in other platforms about your experience in the system and how the work you're doing now is hoping to change it and improve it.
Indeed, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, my journey into the system is not unlike many others. My biological father experienced substance misuse. My mother died when I was young. And as a result, I was put into out-of-home care. So spent several years kind of back and forth between different places and spaces. And as well as spent time in kinship care. Was fortunate enough to be placed with family members who provided a safe, loving space for me. And then from there, decided that I was going to go on and become a child protective service worker because I wanted to do that work a certain way, and I was going to save all the kids. I remember is what I was, what my plan was. And now to be in a space to be able to conduct research and program in that space has just really been a holistic, refreshing experience for me. And it's also been very informing in terms of getting to some pragmatic spaces of thinking about and reframing the service differently. And a lot of the work that happens now is about reframing and thinking about child welfare in a different way, meaning that we often view it as something that we do to children and families, as opposed to reframing and thinking about it being a service that we provide to children and families. And as such, it should be the best service possible. And that's going to require some investing in some innovation and some integration, but I certainly think that we can get there.
We do know that child welfare workers are on the front lines, of course, of all of this, and there have been some improvements in pay. In the last budget cycle, state lawmakers did approve pay increases to help retain and attract others to the field, and also to hire more, because you've been a part of this conversations we've had about there's caseload and there's case weight.
You got it.
I will never forget that, right? That you may have, 12 cases, but there may be 13, 18, 20 people involved in each case, right? So we have to even change our language about how we talk about these things. What else needs to be done?
Well, it really focuses on the reframing of how we think about the work. If you think about child welfare work or becoming a CPS worker, and you look at the news or you Google it, it's all bad. There's nothing that makes you want to run towards that work. And I think for all of us, we have to understand that CPS workers every single day are saving lives. I was a young person who needed to be removed from my home. And we often forget that. We view it as something to be avoided at all costs, and it certainly should. Prevention is certainly important. But there are times for the safety of a young person and their family that a young person does need to be removed. And so we have to really get to a space where we honor and celebrate and recognize that work for what it is. In other professional spaces, nurses and doctors and so forth, we often talk about them saving lives. Well, there's a CPS worker somewhere right now investigating a case and making a decision in an impossible space, and that decision is going to save a child. And so if we always remember that, it will help us think about the investment and development in a very different way.
Recently, there was testimony from 4 social workers who testified before a legislative committee. It was one of the more passionate and emotional pieces of testimony that I've been able to witness in my 25 years covering the legislature, and very real, authentic conversations. But one point was made that social workers will go into environments that even law enforcement will try to avoid, or they can't get the backup necessary from law enforcement to go into some of these spaces and homes that pose a serious risk and danger.
Oh yes, I've been there. I was an investigator for many years, and I remember walking into meth labs that you didn't know was a meth lab at the time. Or, there were times when you would call and try to get some help or support, and it's we'll go check it out first, and we'll come follow up after you. So we are asking these folks to do an impossible job, and they're doing it. And so we must acknowledge that what we are asking of them is difficult. There a lot of times are no good solutions.
Right.
And understanding that, while we will talk about and ascribe blame in a lot of different spaces and places, child welfare is not a someone issue, it's an everyone issue. And so it's important that when we think about that system, that we think about the judges and the teachers and the mandated reporters and everyone else involved, because it's going to take all of those folks to make the improvements necessary that we need to see. And it needs to be predicated foundationally on the concept of investing in the well-being of the workers providing the service.
So we've talked about a lot during this program and on other programs that Kentucky continues, Jana, to be ranked, now we're in the top 6, which is an improvement from where we had been in the top 3 and sliding to 5. But the last 2 years we have shown some improvement, and I know there are some silver linings to take from that, but is it too soon to tell if what we're seeing is a recurring trend
I look at last year, Senate Bill 8 was passed that changed the definition of neglect. So prior to that, families could be penalized for living in poverty. So that statute was updated so that families who are doing the best with the financial means they have cannot be penalized. So I think there's a lot that goes into it, and my hope and my dream is that the more we can be those community supporters, the more we're going to see those cases go down, you know, not even in our state, but across the whole nation.
Allowing Child Protective Services to intervene earlier, more wraparound services to help the family when it comes to substance abuse, et cetera, and increasing the penalties for abusers. We know that those who abuse a child under the age of 12, Ms. Darnell, face more severe penalties than before. Is it too early to know if those changes, which were just enacted, if those changes are making a difference?
I think they are making a difference already. Sometimes just knowing that the law has changed, if someone had any thought about hurting a child in that way, now the law is very different, and they are held accountable in a very different way. It's yet to be seen if that is actually a deterrent. Anecdotally, we certainly think that it is. Plus, it's the right thing to do to help protect kids.
And for those frontline workers who are protecting our children, Dean Miller, what more do you need? What would you advise policymakers to consider strongly?
I think it's investment. Thinking about how we develop a contemporary workforce in terms of innovation and how we need to better prepare, more quickly prepare. You know, these workers are seeing and dealing with horrible things, and you take that home with you. And you know, I remember distinctly I would investigate cases on a Friday, and they would sit with me for the entire weekend because I didn't know what was going to happen when I showed up on Monday, if that kid was going to be okay, if the kid was even going to be alive. And so that's a lot to walk around with. And so getting workers to understand they are not alone, that we support them, we understand the importance of the work that they're doing, and we need to show that. It's one thing to say it, and we can put up our signs and our social media posts, but there comes a time when we need to show it by investing in their well-being.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know expressions of gratitude aren't enough either, but please accept those as sincere to you and to you as well for the work you're doing to help protect Kentucky kids. It's certainly important and appreciated. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kentucky has made progress over the last couple of years in reducing child maltreatment. I encourage you to be a part of this momentum to end child abuse and neglect. And here are a few ways to make a difference right in your own community. Offer help to a parent or child in your neighborhood. Parents of infants and small children can become overwhelmed. A helping hand could make a big difference. Become a volunteer. Search for child advocacy organizations near you and offer your time. There are unlimited volunteer opportunities from administrative to child involvement. And remember, Kentucky is a mandatory reporting state. If you think a child is being abused or neglected, call 1-877-KY-SAFE-1. That's 1-877-597-2331. We thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you now have a greater understanding of child abuse and neglect in Kentucky, as well as how to identify it, intervene, and hopefully prevent it. To watch this program again or to share this program with others, please visit our website at ket.org. Neil Postman once wrote that children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. Let's help make those strong and positive messages to a bright and hopeful future. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Renee Shaw. Take good care.